Welcome back, everybody. You got Will and I-Man here from the Block Runner, and today we're going to be talking about a good old interoperability conundrum that we're seeing in the metaverse.
I don't know if it's a conundrum yet, but it's gonna be, I guess.
It's growing.
Conundrum dependent on like your understanding, your expectations, right? And we've actually had, because we've talked about this a lot with our own community.
Yeah.
You know, interoperability of like games, assets, whatever in the metaverse, and then we found out, to our surprise, most people aren't even like expecting this as like a core feature to like the metaverse. I think because largely it's just a lot of people don't understand like the benefit of it yet because, people were risen in like in a gaming climate where that doesn't really exist.
Everything is siloed.
Right? Yeah.
But we have good examples of interoperability in Web 2. We have like Smash Brothers and, you're playing Pikachu versus Mario. I mean, that's interoperability to a certain degree, right?
I guess interoperability of like IP,
yeah,
but not necessarily interoperability of like
of the underlying asset.
Yeah, like the asset or whatever you're accruing as a player, like your experience, your identity as like a participant in this. Let's call it the Web 2 metaverse or whatever you want to call it, the gaming verse.
Yeah,
it's not a very interoperable world, man.
Yeah, agreed.
So I mean, yeah, I guess people, first of all, the metaverse needs to mature to a state where like there's much more experiences to digest and participate in, like as a user of the metaverse.
Yeah. And
then I think these concerns are going to become much more obvious, right? Like, damn, dude, like I've been spending all my time in this siloed metaverse ecosystem. Mm-hmm. And then I might want to start somewhere else. But kind of sucks all this time I spent here. Exactly. It doesn't really translate anywhere else, right? Like then it becomes a problem.
Yeah. So let's set the stage a little bit. So we've been working on MetaZone for over 2 years now.
Yeah,
and we deployed our project in Decentraland, and it's focused on creating a platform for developers to create and deploy content in the metaverse. Mm-hmm. And so we know there's likely not only going to be just a single metaverse. There's going to be a lot of metaverses.
Yeah.
And what people are talking about now is, if you watch our podcast like in the past, like we predicted that every single PFP project, every single NFT project is going to start saying that they're going to deploy some sort of metaverse, exist in the metaverse, or play in the metaverse, whatever it is. And it's already happening. And just recently, Bored Apes just raised like $400 million in change, and they're implementing their own metaverse. And I saw their deck, and it looks like they're implementing an SDK, which means it's potentially an open metaverse where anybody can contribute to that world.
Yeah.
And so we've been working on this for a while, so we know a lot about the complexities of making content interoperable. And so we stumbled across this article called "Interoperability in the Web3 Gaming Metaverse: Attractive in Theory, Difficult in Practice" by Derek Lau. And so we read through it, and I agreed with a lot of what Derek says.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of perspectives that are missing from Derek's article. So, Derek, if you want to come on to the podcast and chat, we'd be happy to. This would be kind of an interesting conversation.
Yeah, we definitely need to kick on these interviews series for sure. Yeah. Anybody down to come talk shop about metaverse stuff, NFT stuff, whatever, dude. If you want to talk about, what you had for lunch, I'm down for that too.
Yeah, hell yeah.
We're very open to any conversation, really. It's just, because there's a lot to talk about, man, especially with the metaverse. You just you set the ground perfectly in the sense, like, I guess we predicted some things for sure. Mm-hmm. We kind of knew, like, we were witnessing the NFT space, blossom and grow, and, all this magnificent IP is just kind of like spun out of the air, right, through the tool of NFTs. So
for sure,
I guess we spent a lot of our time in the metaverse while this NFT like renaissance was occurring, because that's just like our focus, right? It's just figure out, how do we achieve this interoperable vision that everybody kind of has for the metaverse? And through that, you kind of start to understand like the potential of like applications of these NFTs within the metaverse, right? Like it becomes clear, like that's the purpose of it.
Yes.
Right? And then, like you said, a lot of projects are starting to come to that same realization. That's why they're creating metaverses of their own. But again, it's not being tied into this
the potential
core tenet that is interoperability.
Yeah.
Right. Like I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand the problem, But I think this article, that's why we're making this video. They outline a lot of like the serious issues with interoperability. It's very difficult. That's the reason why a lot of people think of it as like the golden goose.
The golden goose, yeah.
For the metaverse, right? Like it's a big one, dude. It's a doozy.
Yeah. So I definitely recommend you guys listening to read this article. We're kind of going to go through it here, but ultimately, let's kind of define what a lot of people expect the interoperability of the metaverse to be. So interoperability refers to the idea that a single NFT can be used in multiple games or metaverse experiences. And types of interoperability are either the true interoperability, as Derek puts it, or the fake interoperability. So just to describe what a true interoperability single asset is this refers to having only one NFT used across multiple ecosystems. For example, imagine there's a character NFT that lets you use a common avatar across Fortnite, Lost Ark, and World of Warcraft. And then there's this version called fake interoperability. This refers to having multiple NFTs used across multiple ecosystems, but in the way that gives the impression of interoperability. For example, imagine you buy a character NFT in Fortnite. At the same time, you get given a free character NFT in Lost Ark and World of Warcraft. You're now able to use the same character NFT across all three games, but in reality, there are three different NFTs behind them. So I totally agree with this. I think when we're talking about interoperability, we're talking about true interoperability. So a single asset in the perspective of Metaverse is that single asset being deployable in multiple worlds. So definitely agree with the types of interoperability here. And so how does true interoperability work? So minting selection. NFTs have to come from somewhere. Will a game integrate an existing NFT, or will they create a new NFT with an expectation that others will integrate it into their ecosystem? And then there's the technical integration, implementing the NFT into an ecosystem, including accommodating the technical standards or even the choice of blockchain. So now we're starting getting into the implementation of interoperability. So I think when it comes to interoperability, there's a clear understanding that when you're talking about metaverses, each metaverse has its own limitations, right? Yeah. Decentraland is a little bit more open compared to the other metaverses where they have an SDK where people can contribute pretty much anything that you want as long as you're a developer and you're skilled enough to create that content. And then there's less open metaverses, more like Sandbox, where instead they created a tool that allows anybody to create content within that world. But you won't be able to see like DeFi in Sandbox, right? You won't be able to see like different, random creations from developers in Sandbox. So, and both models work perfectly fine as a business. So it's not a strike on anyone, but it's more about the different outlooks of how people interpret their metaverses, right? Expectations.
Yeah.
So in the article, it talks about the challenges to interoperability, lack of incentive to not be the mentor, technical challenges to integration. So ultimately is if you create an asset, what is the incentive for anyone to deploy that asset in their own ecosystem, right? And there really isn't any incentive like that. That's
unless you're like some like startup metaverse, I guess, that doesn't, and I think
that was going to be my point.
Yeah, like they it happens in like in the traditional, I guess, like DeFi space, like that they call them vampire attacks, right? And he lists that as a potential reason why you would want to do this. And I think there are projects out there leveraging this same concept to get like users, rushing into their own siloed ecosystem for that very reason, right? It's like a shortcut.
That's right.
To onboard users, because everybody already has these assets sitting around, right? These PFP, we've already lived through PFP mania. There's hundreds, millions of NFTs probably out there at this point.
Yeah,
and the burning in people's wallets. People want to do something with them, right? And so people are coming out with these concepts of utility, like come to our verse.
Yes,
you could use your NFT here, and voila, like interoperability achieved.
Yeah. And so what we wanted to talk about is this fifth, the most complex, is if it's actually become easy for projects to both implement interoperability and align incentives with all future integrations. So I think the perspective that Derek is missing here is specifically the metaverse perspective, because when it comes to like open metaverses, ultimately Decentraland doesn't really care what's being deployed on their land. Like, you don't have to work with the Decentraland team to deploy your NFTs into Decentraland. You, as a developer, just use their SDK, and all of a sudden you can deploy anything that you want, from DeFi to your own NFTs if you create a platform like we did.
Yeah.
And so ultimately, I think interoperability is really going to come down to open metaverses, right? Because if you create a battle game and I create a racing game and our games are based on these NFTs, there's no real incentive for us to collaborate and like why would you take my racing game and your battle game and kind of merge them into, something like it doesn't really make sense.
Yeah.
So, but we have our own respective games, and then all of a sudden Decentraland comes into the picture and it starts getting like millions of users. There's an incentive for us to go into the metaverse and exist and have some presence there. Mm-hmm. And so there needs to be some sort of framework that we can leverage that will allow us to deploy our assets and to deploy a portion of our game at least into Decentraland in this example. And so I think that's the perspective that's missing, is that interoperability is not going to be cross games, but it's going to happen within the metaverse where all of a sudden you're in Decentraland and you can see your racing game and my battle game like all there in a composable way, right? In a way where they coexist with each other. And then so now all of a sudden these assets that are workable in our game are now workable in Decentraland.
So then that begs the question. So like if you're proclaiming or whatever, Decentraland to be like the end all be all of interoperability, deployability for I guess assets across the board from whatever verse they exist in or came from, originated from, whatever.
Yeah.
Is that it? Is Decentraland the
no, absolutely not.
Okay, so what comes after that then? Like, how do we expand this potential interoperable like playground?
Yeah,
because Decentraland has a lot of the necessary components, right? Is what you're saying? It's very open in its provision as a platform,
correct,
right?
Correct.
Therefore, like anybody who has this outside IP, the ability to create these assets and these type of experiences, they can exist in this,
correct,
this type of framework.
Exactly.
So what needs to happen next after that?
So I guess the question is, if Decentraland has the right framework to allow any IP to exist within Decentraland, then a more mature version of like the concept of the metaverse is to have several types of Decentralands out there, basically open metaverses that play within this framework of interoperability.
Yeah.
And so what happens now is we have to think about the developer. They're the single most important asset in this equation, in the fact that we need to increase the ROI of the developer, because if you're a dev and you're seeing like these hundreds of metaverses being spun up, and you want to create content for the metaverse, you have to select the silo that you want to exist in.
Yeah.
And then the silo that you select ends up busting, and then you just wasted a bunch of time. So there needs to be a framework that allows the developers to create content and using that framework and allow that content to be deployable in all those open metaverses.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's what we're focused on with MetaZone, is that framework that, I guess we should jump into it now. It's called, it's a concept that we've been using on the internet and in networks for at least 30 years, is abstraction layers. So I'll give you the definition of an abstraction layer. It says, in computing, an abstraction layer or level is a way of hiding the working details of a subsystem, allowing a separation of concerns to facilitate interoperability and platform independence. And so this defines the very technology that's needed to connect different and open metaverses in a way where content that's generated becomes interoperable.
Mm-hmm. And that's where it starts, right? Because in order for, I guess, interoperable player experience to exist, the content first needs to become interoperable.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? So, like, the experience, they used in the article, like, an example of, like, when you play 3 different games, Fortnite, World of Warcraft, and whatever the third one was, Roblox, let's say, like, you're creating 3 different player experiences, 3 different player personas, histories, whatever you want to call it, identities. And they don't intertwine, right? Like you said, as a player, as a creator, whatever, you have to pick one.
Yeah,
if
for
you're
sure.
going to exist, if you're going to contribute time, effort, resources, whatever it is to participate in that ecosystem, that's it.
Yeah.
But like, if by making content deployable in all 3 of these different verses, these different ecosystems, whatever, all of a sudden, like, everybody who participates in either one of the three, like they still have traversability, I guess is like the word.
Right.
Where like their experience is still recognized in, verse 3 and 2.
Right.
If they spend all their time in verse 1 or whatever.
That's right.
Like imagine playing World of Warcraft, which I did for many years. I spent all that time accruing all that gold, having like the best gear, the best weapons in the game. Right. And then I want to go play this game and it just doesn't, it's not recognized. There's no potential for like, applicability because the content doesn't exist or it's not even deployable in the first place. Like,
right.
So that's like the master issue, I guess, at hand here, right? It's just building that abstraction layer.
Yep.
Like for each of these independent verses.
Mm-hmm.
So that content creators can at least like have the option or the ability to like deploy their content in either location.
Yeah, for
either
sure.
Space.
Yeah, 100%.
And it starts there because then now the player has access. You could jump around from different virtual spaces.
Yes.
And like my identity is still present, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and whether we exist or not, this is going to happen, right? It happened with the internet. Imagine if we didn't have interoperability within the internet and we had to jump to different networks to access different websites.
Yeah.
The internet wouldn't be what it is today.
It would blow for sure.
Yeah. So the same thing's going to happen with open metaverses. And now I say open metaverses because the closed metaverses, they have a different business model. They're not as concerned with interoperability as an open metaverse might. Or because if you're like a big brand, like let's say Disney or whatever, and you want to exist in the metaverse, you want to exist in like the most efficient way of creating content that is accessible through different metaverses, rather than going into each metaverse and creating content there to have presence in the metaverse.
Mm-hmm.
So all of this is to say that the metaverse is going to be important. A lot of stuff still need to be built in order to make it feasible for developers to really jump in and start creating content in the same way that we have hundreds and thousands of apps for iPhone and Android.
Yeah. Like
we need that same sort of output from our developers, but in the metaverse, because the metaverse contextualizes everything that we've done on the internet, like in 3D format. It creates a better cohesive system for people to interact with each other in a very intuitive way. I mean, imagine if one of the ways to interact with DeFi was through the metaverse, where you can go to a yield farm and submit your tokens to this yield farm and watch your crops grow, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. As one intuitive way to contribute to DeFi.
Yeah.
So like you can apply this to pretty much anything, to gaming and any industry that exists, sub industry that exists in crypto. So yeah, this is just kind of our take on like the interoperability. Yeah, it's definitely absolutely complicated.
Yeah,
but
for
it's
sure.
Definitely not impossible.
Yeah, but we're going to see a lot of attempts. Like, as everyone has their own interpretation of how they think interoperability, should exist, and I think this is a good list of like today's attempt at that.
Yes.
And that's perfectly fine. There's going to be growth spurts, like different little stepping stones to get to that, end game realization of what true interoperability feels like.
Yeah.
And like what it actually provides, like as a overall ecosystem, right? So
yeah.
Should be exciting, man. To just like see it evolve over time. And yeah, like I guess the reason for us talking about it is because it's clearly one of our focuses as a platform.
Yeah.
Because we have creators, we have content being produced, and we understand like just because it's applicable in one metaverse it's not like the end of that utility for that creation, right? Like all these creations, all these metas throughout this ecosystem, they serve function in any virtual space, right? I mean, most of they got buildings, we got vehicles, we got game assets, we got DEX machines, ATM, whatever the hell. We got even potential restaurant like portals, like interfaces that you can have in virtual worlds. Like that's something that needs to exist across the board, right? So why would you recreate that every single time?
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, you wouldn't do that.
You would create it, but the platform needs to be able to facilitate that I guess that ubiquitous application. Across the board, independent of what kind of metaverse it is, right? So
yeah, in the same way you would create a website and you would have like your restaurant accessible through through the internet, You can order food through that website. I mean, that's
Exactly.
the experience that you want to create in the metaverse.
So I guess we have like a huge incentive, I guess, to care about this stuff because we want our creators to be as super powerful as possible.
Yeah.
I mean, they already are. Like they just take a look at the page. They create awesome content. So we want to continue to expand the ecosystem and grow it as big as possible beyond just the bounds of Decentraland.
Yeah.
And we want their creations to be again utilized in any virtual space, right? So, and then through the process of that desire, this is how we came to the conclusions of like the closed metaverse, which is today's metaverse.
Mm-hmm.
It's just
silos.
the silos.
Yeah,
it makes that incredibly difficult to do, right? So, through our desire and our the mission, I guess, of like making metaverse or metas more interoperable, like this is why. The abstraction layer you kind of like briefly went over.
Mm-hmm.
This is like the very introduction phase of like, I guess like the next stage of MetaZone, like as like a baseline protocol.
Yep,
you could call
that's
it.
right. That's right.
Like, I mean, there's a lot that's going to go into this that we probably can't talk in like the next 3 or 4 minutes, but for sure, if you guys want to like follow us along on this journey, because it's going to be a long one.
Yeah,
I mean, this is all we're going to do. This is what we're going to talk about in our podcasts.
That's right.
In our Discord, we talk about this stuff all the time. We have community events every week. You could attend that as we continue to talk about this stuff.
Yeah.
and update you guys on like the development progress heading towards this.
Yes.
Because there's a lot that goes into it, man, and we haven't even like cracked the surface really.
Yeah, this is barely scratching the surface. So if you guys agree with our interoperability definitions and expectations of the future, let us know in the comments. If you don't agree, let us know in the comments as well. Make sure you follow us on Twitter at The Block Runner and also at MetaZone.io. And we'll catch you in the next video.
Peace.